never thought watching my brother cut a celebration cake could feel like watching my own execution. But there I was, standing in the corner of the Millfield Country Club's main dining room, wearing my only decent civilian dress, while Kevin basked in applause from 50 family friends who acted like he'd just discovered electricity. The banner hanging above the dessert table read, "Congratulations, Kevin Mitchell, Junior Partner," in gold letters that probably cost more than my monthly housing allowance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The whole evening felt wrong from the moment I walked through those mahogany doors. I'd driven 8 hours straight from Norfolk, still exhausted from 3 months at sea, because Mom had called crying about how important it was for the family to be together, how we needed to celebrate Kevin's achievement properly, how it would mean everything to Dad to see both his children supporting each other. She'd made it sound like Kevin was being inducted into the Supreme Court, not just making junior partner at a mid-tier law firm in downtown Cleveland. Dad stood at the center of the room like he was running for mayor, his chest puffed out in the way it only got when he was talking about Kevin's accomplishments. He wore his best suit, the navy one he'd bought for Kevin's law school graduation, and kept checking his watch like he was timing something important. Every few minutes he'd raise his voice just enough to ensure the entire room could hear whatever story he was telling about his brilliant lawyer son. I tried to blend into the wallpaper near the appetizer table, picking at shrimp I couldn't taste while distant relatives I hadn't seen in years nodded politely when they remembered I existed. Cousin Jenny asked what I'd been up to, and when I mentioned I was stationed in Virginia, she immediately launched into a story about her daughter's college roommate who dated a Marine once. That was the extent of her interest in my military service. No follow-up questions, no curiosity about what I actually did in the Navy, just a transition into wedding planning details that had nothing to do with me. The worst part wasn't being ignored. I'd grown used to that over the years. The worst part was watching Mom beam at Kevin like he'd personally solved world hunger, while she hadn't asked me a single meaningful question since I'd arrived. She'd hugged me at the door, commented that I looked tired, and then immediately pulled me aside to ask if I could help serve drinks later, because the catering staff was short-handed. As if I'd driven 800 miles to play waitress at my brother's ego party. Kevin worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and accepting congratulations with the practiced humility of someone who'd never doubted he deserved every bit of attention he received. He wore success easily, the way some people wear expensive cologne. His wife Jessica clung to his arm, diamond engagement ring catching the light every time she gestured, which was often. They looked like they belonged in this room, among these people, in this life of predictable achievements and social climbing. I stood there in my off-the-rack dress, watching my family celebrate someone who'd never risked anything more dangerous than a difficult client meeting, while my phone buzzed quietly with encrypted messages I couldn't discuss with anyone in this room. 3 months ago, I'd been coordinating a multi-ship operation in waters most of these people couldn't find on a map, making decisions that affected international shipping lanes and regional stability. But tonight, I was just Kevin's little sister who'd never quite figured out how to be successful. The real knife twist came during Dad's speech. He tapped his fork against his wine glass until the chatter died down, then cleared his throat with the gravity of someone about to deliver a State of the Union address. The room fell silent except for the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. 28 years ago, Carol and I brought home our first child. Dad began, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when he wanted to sound profound. We knew Kevin was special from the beginning. Even as a baby, he had this determination, this focus that you just can't teach. I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. I was older than Kevin by 18 months, but Dad always told this story like Kevin was the firstborn, the one who'd taught them how to be parents. It was a small revision of history, but it stung every time. Watching him grow into the man he is today, seeing him achieve partnership at Morrison, Clark & Associates, it reminds me why we work so hard as parents. Kevin represents everything we hoped our children could become. Successful, respected, stable. He's proof that when you apply yourself and make smart choices, good things happen. The applause erupted around me like thunder. People nodded knowingly, as if Dad had just revealed some profound truth about parenting and life choices. I caught Aunt Beth's eye across the room. She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot, but she clapped along with everyone else. Dad raised his glass higher. To Kevin Mitchell, junior partner, and to the family legacy he's carrying forward, we couldn't be more proud. I lifted my glass mechanically, the champagne tasting like disappointment and chlorine. Nobody toasted my service. Nobody mentioned the commendations sitting in my apartment, or the classified operations that would never make it into casual dinner conversation. In this room, success meant billable hours and partnership tracks, not protecting shipping lanes or coordinating humanitarian missions in hostile waters. As the applause died down and conversations resumed, I slipped out onto the club's terrace. The October air cut through my dress, but it felt cleaner than the suffocating atmosphere inside. I leaned against the stone railing overlooking Clearwater Lake, watching the moon reflect off the dark water, and wondered why I kept showing up to these family gatherings that left me feeling like a stranger in my own life. My phone buzzed again. Another encrypted message, probably from Lieutenant Chen with updates I'd need to address tomorrow. I glanced back through the windows at my family celebrating Kevin's achievement, then at the message notification glowing on my screen. Two different worlds, neither of which seemed to have room for the other. I didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when families work overtime to keep it buried. I left the country club without saying goodbye, not because I was angry, though I was, but because I knew if I tried to explain why I was leaving, someone would ask me to stay for the sake of family unity. Someone would remind me that Kevin worked hard for this moment, that Mom had planned this evening for weeks, that walking out would just prove I was as unreliable as they'd always suspected. So I grabbed my coat from the check, nodded to the hostess, and walked into the parking lot where my 10-year-old Honda sat between a Mercedes and a BMW like an apology. The drive back to Virginia Beach stretched ahead like a punishment. 8 hours of interstate highway, rest stop coffee, and whatever late-night radio could offer to fill the silence in my head. I'd made this trip dozens of times over the years, shuttling between my Navy life and my family obligations, but tonight felt different. Final. Somehow. Like I'd just attended my own funeral and watched everyone move on without missing a beat. 2 hours into the drive, somewhere between Columbus and Wheeling, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Admiral Blackwood's name, which was impossible since he'd died 6 months ago from a heart attack while fishing off the coast of Maryland. I pulled over at the next rest area, hands shaking slightly as I stared at the screen. The call went to voicemail. Admiral Thomas Blackwood had been my mentor since my second year at the Naval Academy. A crusty old submarine commander who'd served 3 tours in the Pacific and somehow ended up teaching leadership ethics to midshipmen who thought they knew everything about honor and duty. He was the one professor who never seemed impressed by family connections or smooth talking. He cared about results, about character, about the kind of leader you became when nobody was watching. After graduation, he'd followed my career from a distance, sending brief notes when I received commendations, calling occasionally to check in when I was deployed to particularly difficult assignments. He never offered advice unless I asked, but he had a way of asking the right questions that helped me figure out my own answers. When he died, I'd flown back from the Mediterranean to attend his funeral, a small military ceremony attended mostly by former students and a handful of Navy brass. His sister mentioned that he'd left some personal effects for various people, but I'd never received anything. I listened to the voicemail 3 times before I fully processed what I was hearing. It wasn't Admiral Blackwood's voice, but his sister Margaret, calling from his estate in Chesapeake Bay. Her voice sounded strained, almost whispered, like she was calling from somewhere she wasn't supposed to be using the phone. "Sarah, this is Margaret Blackwood. I found something Tom left for you, hidden in his study. I should have called months ago, but honestly, I forgot about it until tonight. There's an envelope with your name on it, sealed, with instructions that I should only contact you if something happened that made you question your family's support. I don't know what that means, but I saw the news article about your brother's promotion party tonight, and Tom always said you deserved better recognition than you received. I think you should come see this. I'll be at the estate through the weekend." I sat in my car in the fluorescent glow of the rest area, watching truckers and late-night travelers move through their routines while my world tilted sideways. Margaret had seen a news article about Kevin's party. That meant someone had contacted local media about it, probably Dad. making sure Kevin's achievement got proper coverage in the hometown paper. But more unsettling was her comment about questioning my family's support. How could Admiral Blackwood have predicted that I'd be sitting in a parking lot at midnight, wondering why I felt like a stranger at my own brother's celebration? The estate was only 2 hours out of my way, maybe 3, if I stopped for coffee to clear my head. I could drive there now, see what Admiral Blackwood had left behind, and still make it back to Norfolk by morning. I had Tuesday off, and my next assignment briefing wasn't until Wednesday. No one expected me anywhere until then. No one would miss me if I detoured through Maryland to chase down a dead man's message. I merged back onto the interstate, but instead of continuing south toward Virginia, I took the exit toward Frederick, Maryland. The roads grew narrower and darker as I left the main highway, following GPS directions toward the Chesapeake Bay area, where Admiral Blackwood had bought a small waterfront property after his retirement. I'd never visited him there, though he'd mentioned it in our phone conversations. A place to fish and read military histories without interruption, he'd said. Somewhere quiet enough to think. The estate sat at the end of a gravel lane, lined with oak trees that had probably been standing since before the Civil War. The house itself was modest by country club standards. A 2-story colonial with white clapboard siding and green shutters that looked like they'd been painted recently. Margaret's car, a sensible Toyota sedan, was parked in the circular drive. Lights glowed in several windows despite the late hour. Margaret answered the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for me through the front window. She was smaller than I remembered from the funeral, more fragile, wearing a navy cardigan over a white blouse that made her look like she was dressed for church. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes had the same sharp. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, the intelligence I remembered from her brother. "Sarah," she said, opening the door wider, "thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." The interior of the house felt like stepping into Admiral Blackwood's office at the academy, except warmer, more lived in. Naval charts covered one wall of the living room, marked with red pins that probably corresponded to places he'd served or battles he'd studied. Bookshelves lined every available wall space, filled with military histories, leadership texts, and what looked like decades of bound naval journals. Ship models sat on every flat surface, from modern destroyers to historical frigates, each one precisely detailed and perfectly maintained. Margaret led me through the living room to a smaller room that had obviously served as Admiral Blackwood's study. A massive oak desk dominated the space, its surface cleared except for a single manila envelope with my name written across the front in the Admiral's distinctive handwriting. Behind the desk, a wall of framed photographs showed him at various stages of his career, from a young ensign standing beside a submarine to formal portraits in dress uniform. "He sealed this 6 months before he died," Margaret said, picking up the envelope and turning it over in her hands. "Said I should keep it in his safe until you needed it. I asked him how I'd know when you needed it, and he just smiled that way he did when he knew something you didn't. Said I'd recognize the moment when it came." I took the envelope from her, surprised by its weight. Something more substantial than just a letter was inside. My name was written in blue ink, probably from the fountain pen he'd carried since his academy days. Below my name he'd added a single line, "For when they try to erase what you've accomplished." The words hit me like a physical blow. How could he have known? How could anyone have predicted that I'd spend an evening watching my family celebrate achievements while ignoring my own? I looked up at Margaret, who was watching me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Did he ever mention my family?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Only once. He said you came from people who measured success in dollars and social status, not in service and sacrifice. Said it was a wonder you'd turned out as well as you did, considering." She paused, studying my expression. "He also said that someday they'd try to diminish your accomplishments to make themselves feel better about their choices, and when that happened, you'd need to remember who you really were." I stared down at the envelope, feeling the weight of whatever was inside. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately, but another part was afraid of what I might find. Admiral Blackwood had never been wrong about anything important, and if he'd predicted this moment, he'd probably also known what I'd need to do about it. "There's something else," Margaret said, walking to the bookshelf behind the desk. She pulled out a thick volume on naval strategy and opened it to reveal a hollowed-out section containing a small digital recorder. "He made this about a week before he died." Said if I ever gave you the envelope, I should also play this recording. He was very specific about the order. She handed me the recorder, a simple device with a single play button. I looked at it for a long moment, then at the envelope, then at Margaret's expectant face. Whatever Admiral Blackwood had wanted me to know, whatever he'd hidden away for this exact moment, I was about to discover it in the study of a dead man who'd somehow seen the future more clearly than I could see the present. "Would you like some coffee?" Margaret asked. "I have a feeling this might take a while." I nodded, settling into the leather chair across from Admiral Blackwood's desk. The envelope sat in my lap like a dormant explosive, and the recorder waited on the desk between us. Outside, wind moved through the oak trees, making shadows dance across the naval charts on the wall. Whatever was about to happen, whatever Admiral Blackwood had preserved for this moment, I knew my life was about to change direction in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The truth, as I was about to learn, had been waiting for me all along. Margaret returned with 2 steaming mugs of coffee that smelled like the kind of strong brew Admiral Blackwood used to keep in his office during late-night strategy sessions. She set one beside me and settled into the chair across the desk, her hands wrapped around her own mug like she needed the warmth. The recorder sat between us, small and unremarkable, but somehow charged with significance. I picked up the envelope first, running my finger along the sealed edge before carefully tearing it open. Inside were 3 items: a folded letter, a small brass key attached to a chain, and what looked like a military access card with my name printed across the front. The access card was unfamiliar, marked with clearance levels I'd never seen before, and bearing the seal of Naval Intelligence Command. The letter was written on Admiral Blackwood's personal stationery, the kind with his name embossed at the top in simple navy lettering. His handwriting was precise, each word carefully formed, as if he'd taken time to consider every sentence before committing it to paper. "Sarah," it began, "if you're reading this, Margaret has determined that your family has finally revealed their true opinion of your service. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I've watched this pattern for too many years to believe it would end differently. What you don't know, what no one has told you, is that your achievements go far beyond what appears in your official personnel file. The card in this envelope will grant you access to classified records at the Naval War College in Newport. Ask for Commander Jake Rivera in the Strategic Studies Department. Tell him Admiral Blackwood sent you to review Operation Seahawk archives. He'll understand." I stopped reading and looked at Margaret, who was watching me with the patient expression of someone who'd been keeping secrets for months. "Did you know what was in here?" She shook her head. "Tom never told me specifics, but he did say that the Navy had a habit of classifying heroism when it was inconvenient for politics. Said there were officers whose families would never know what they'd really accomplished because the truth was buried in files marked with clearance levels higher than most people would ever see." I returned to the letter. Operation Seahawk was classified at levels that prevented normal commendation procedures. Your actions during the Persian Gulf crisis last year saved not only your crew, but potentially prevented an international incident that could have destabilized the entire region. The official record shows you as part of a routine patrol operation. The classified record tells a different story entirely. My coffee grew cold as I read, my hands beginning to shake slightly. Operation Seahawk wasn't a name I recognized, but the time frame matched my deployment to the Persian Gulf, the one that had ended abruptly with orders to return to Norfolk ahead of schedule. We'd been told it was due to mechanical issues with our destroyer, but I'd always suspected there was more to the story. Equipment failures don't usually result in immediate reassignment and months of debriefing sessions with officers whose names I was instructed to forget. The key opens a safe deposit box at Chesapeake Bay Maritime Bank, box number 247. Inside you'll find video testimonies from your crew members, declassified after my death per my security clearance privileges. You'll also find copies of intelligence reports detailing the threat you neutralized and the recommendations for commendation that were buried for national security reasons. Sarah, you didn't just serve your country well, you saved lives and prevented a war. Your family's ignorance of this fact doesn't diminish its truth. The letter was signed simply Admiral T. Blackwood, with a date from 3 weeks before his death. Below his signature, he'd added a postscript. "Commander Rivera knows the full story. Trust him." I set the letter down and picked up the recorder, my finger hovering over the play button. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her eyes reflecting the same curiosity I felt. Whatever Admiral Blackwood had recorded, he'd considered it important enough to preserve specifically for this moment. His voice emerged from the small speaker, slightly distorted but unmistakably his own, carrying the same measured cadence I remembered from his lectures at the academy. "Sarah, I'm recording this on a Tuesday evening in my study, 3 weeks after the doctors told me my heart is giving out faster than anticipated. I want to make sure certain facts are preserved before I'm no longer here to verify them." There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling, then his voice continued. "6 months ago, you were commanding the USS Meridian during what your family believes was a routine patrol in the Persian Gulf. What they don't know is that you were actually leading a 3-ship task force in response to intelligence indicating that Iranian Revolutionary Guard units were planning to seize a commercial tanker carrying humanitarian supplies to Yemen. The seizure would have been blamed on Somali pirates, giving Iran plausible deniability while creating a justification for expanded military presence in shipping lanes. I felt my breath catch. The USS Meridian deployment, the one that had ended so abruptly, the one I'd barely mentioned to my family because there wasn't much to say about routine patrols and equipment maintenance. But I remembered the tension among the crew during those final weeks, the encrypted communications that came at all hours, the sense that something significant was happening just beyond the edge of our official mission parameters. Admiral Blackwood's voice continued, steady and factual, like he was delivering a briefing to senior officers. "At 0347 hours on March 15th, your sonar operator detected irregular movement patterns from 3 vessels approximately 12 nautical miles from your position. Rather than following standard protocol and requesting instructions from Fleet Command, you made the tactical decision to investigate immediately. This decision, which could have resulted in a court-martial if it had gone wrong, instead prevented an international incident. The recorder captured the sound of him taking a sip of something, probably the same strong coffee Margaret had just served me. Your task force arrived to find the Iranian vessels in the process of boarding the humanitarian tanker. The crew was being held at gunpoint, while the ship's manifest was altered to show that the cargo was actually weapons bound for Houthi rebels. When you announced your presence and demanded the immediate release of the tanker crew, the Iranian commander initially refused, claiming they were conducting a legitimate anti-piracy operation. I closed my eyes, remembering that morning with crystal clarity now. The radio communications in Farsi that our translator had quickly converted to English. The sight of armed figures on the deck of a ship that was supposed to be carrying medical supplies and food aid. The terrible calculation of whether to engage or retreat, knowing that either choice could have consequences far beyond my pay grade. What happened next, Admiral Blackwood's voice said, required the kind of leadership and tactical thinking that can't be taught in any classroom. Instead of escalating to armed confrontation, you requested permission to inspect the Iranian vessels for signs of distress, claiming concern for their crew's welfare. When the Iranian commander agreed, thinking he was calling your bluff, you discovered that one of their vessels was actually taking on water from damage sustained during the boarding operation. The memory crystallized completely now. The Iranian vessel listing slightly to starboard, its crew working frantically at bilge pumps while trying to maintain the appearance of being in control of the situation. The moment when I realized we could help them save face while accomplishing our mission. You offered immediate assistance with repairs, framing the entire incident as a rescue operation rather than a confrontation. The Iranian commander, faced with the choice between accepting help or watching his vessel sink in international waters, agreed to release the tanker crew in exchange for emergency mechanical assistance. Your engineering teams worked alongside Iranian sailors for 6 hours, repairing damage while humanitarian supplies continued safely to their destination. Admiral Blackwood paused, and I could hear him shifting in his chair. The official record shows this as a successful anti-piracy patrol with international cooperation. The classified record shows that you prevented the seizure of humanitarian aid, avoided an armed confrontation that could have triggered broader regional conflict, and turned a potential international incident into a demonstration of naval professionalism. 3 different intelligence agencies wrote commendations for your actions. All 3 were classified and buried. The recording ended with a soft click, leaving Margaret and me sitting in silence broken only by the tick of an antique clock on the bookshelf. I stared at the access card in my hand, this small piece of plastic that apparently held the key to understanding why my family saw me as a failure while the Navy had classified me as something else entirely. Margaret refilled my coffee without asking, her movements careful and deliberate. "He talked about you quite often in those final months," she said quietly. "Said you were one of the finest officers he'd ever mentored, but that your family would never understand what you'd accomplished because they measured success in terms they could discuss at dinner parties." I picked up the brass key, feeling its weight against my palm, a safe deposit box containing video testimonies and intelligence reports, evidence of achievements that had been buried so deep that even I hadn't fully understood their significance. The USS Meridian deployment had ended with commendations for successful completion of mission objectives, but I'd assumed those were routine recognition for routine work. "Commander Rivera at the Naval War College," I said, reading from the letter again. "Do you know him?" Margaret shook her head. "But Tom trusted very few people with classified information. If he's directing you to this Commander Rivera, then he's someone who can be trusted with whatever you're about to uncover." I looked around Admiral Blackwood's study, at the decades of naval history lining the walls, the ship models representing vessels he'd served on or studied, the charts marking battles and operations that had shaped maritime strategy. He'd spent his career understanding how individual actions connected to larger historical patterns, how decisions made by junior officers could ripple outward to affect global stability. The access card felt warm in my hand, as if it contained energy waiting to be released. Newport was 4 hours north, an easy drive that would take me directly to the Naval War College, where Commander Rivera waited with archives I'd never known existed. The safe deposit box at Chesapeake Bay Maritime Bank would open with the key Admiral Blackwood had preserved for me, revealing testimonies from my own crew members about events I'd lived through but never fully comprehended. My phone buzzed with a text message from Mom. "Hope you got home safely. Kevin said to tell you thanks for coming tonight. It meant a lot to the family." I stared at the message, then at the classified access card, then at Admiral Blackwood's letter, describing actions that had prevented an international incident. My family's version of success was Kevin making junior partner at a law firm. The Navy's version was classified operations that saved lives and prevented wars. The disconnect was so profound it felt surreal. Margaret stood and walked to the window overlooking Chesapeake Bay, where morning light was beginning to streak across the water. "Tom said you'd know what to do with the information once you had it. Said you'd understand the difference between recognition and understanding, between family approval and professional accomplishment." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, along with the key and access card. Admiral Blackwood had given me a trail to follow, evidence to uncover, and allies who knew the truth about achievements my family would never understand. The question wasn't whether I'd follow that trail. The question was what I'd do with the truth once I found it. The drive to Newport took me through familiar New England landscape that looked different in the gray morning light filtering through October clouds. I'd been to the Naval War College twice before for professional development courses, but never with a classified access card burning a hole in my jacket pocket and questions that felt heavier than my military textbooks had ever been. The caffeine from Margaret's coffee was wearing off, replaced by a nervous energy that made my hands grip the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Newport's historic district rolled past my windows, all colonial architecture and tourist shops that would be closing soon for the winter season. The Naval War College sat on Coaster's Harbor Island, connected to the mainland by a bridge that always made me feel like I was crossing into a different world. The institution's brick buildings and manicured lawns spoke of tradition and permanence, of decisions made in quiet offices that shaped global maritime strategy. The security checkpoint at the main gate took longer than usual. The guard examined my military ID, then the classified access card Admiral Blackwood had left me, scanning both through systems I couldn't see. His expression remained neutral, professional, but I caught him glancing at his computer screen twice before handing the cards back with instructions to report directly to Building 86, Strategic Studies Department. Building 86 sat at the heart of the campus, a 3-story brick structure that housed the college's most sensitive research operations. I'd walked past it dozens of times but never had reason to enter. The lobby felt different from other military buildings, quieter somehow. with carpet instead of polished floors and artwork on the walls instead of the usual motivational posters. A receptionist behind bulletproof glass checked my credentials again before directing me to the third floor. Commander Jake Rivera's office was tucked at the end of a hallway lined with portraits of distinguished naval officers whose names I recognized from strategy textbooks. His door was open, revealing a space that looked more like a professor's study than a military office. Books covered every available surface, many in languages I couldn't identify, and maritime charts were pinned to bulletin boards alongside newspaper clippings and what appeared to be academic research papers. Rivera himself looked younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of precise bearing that suggested submarine service. He wore dress blues with ribbons I recognized from deployments to regions where things happened that didn't make the evening news. When he looked up from his computer and saw me standing in the doorway, his expression shifted from polite attention to something approaching relief. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell," he said, standing and extending his hand. "Admiral Blackwood told me you'd be coming, though he didn't specify when. Please, come in and close the door." The handshake was firm, professional, but his eyes held the kind of intensity I associated with officers who dealt in information that could start or prevent wars. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, then moved to a wall safe I hadn't noticed, its face hidden behind a framed photograph of the USS Nautilus. "Before we begin," Rivera said, entering a combination into the safe, "I need to verify your security clearance and explain what you're about to access." Admiral Blackwood left specific instructions regarding Operation Seahawk archives, but the material we'll be reviewing is classified at levels that exceed your current authorization. He pulled a folder from the safe, thick with documents that bore classification stamps I'd never seen before. "However, as the commanding officer during the operation in question, you have retroactive access to materials pertaining to your own actions and their consequences. The Admiral arranged this through channels I'm not at liberty to discuss." Rivera returned to his desk and opened the folder, revealing what looked like intelligence briefings, satellite photographs, and transcripts of communications I didn't remember having. The top document was marked with so many classification stamps that half the page looked like a redacted puzzle. "Operation Seahawk wasn't the name your crew knew," Rivera began, settling back in his chair. "Your official mission orders classified it as Routine Patrol 7 Alpha, standard anti-piracy operations in the Persian Gulf. What you actually participated in was a joint intelligence operation involving the CIA, naval intelligence, and elements of Israeli maritime security." He turned one of the photographs toward me, a satellite image showing 3 vessels in formation. I recognized the configuration immediately, though seeing it from above gave the scene a different perspective than I'd had from the bridge of the USS Meridian. "The humanitarian tanker you encountered wasn't randomly targeted," Rivera continued. "Intelligence had indicated for 3 weeks that Iranian Revolutionary Guard units were planning to seize that specific vessel. The cargo manifest showed medical supplies and food aid for Yemen, but hidden in the containers were prototype communication systems developed by a European defense contractor." I leaned forward, studying the photograph more carefully. "Communication systems?" "Encrypted satellite communication equipment designed for use in urban warfare scenarios. The technology could have been reverse-engineered to give Iranian forces significant advantages in coordinating attacks against coalition ships throughout the region. If the seizure had succeeded, Tehran would have gained access to NATO-level communication protocols." Rivera pulled out another document, this one showing what appeared to be a detailed schematic of electronic equipment I didn't recognize. "Your task force was positioned as backup to a planned SEAL interdiction operation. The SEALs were supposed to board the tanker before the Iranian vessels arrived, secure the communication equipment, and extract it without anyone knowing it had ever been there." The pieces began falling into place, connections forming between events I'd experienced but never fully understood. "But we arrived at the scene first." "Exactly. The SEAL team was delayed by mechanical problems with their insertion craft. When your sonar operator detected the Iranian vessels, you were the only Allied force in position to prevent the seizure. The decision to investigate immediately, rather than waiting for orders, put you directly into the middle of an operation you didn't know existed." Rivera turned to a new section of documents, these bearing the seal of Naval Intelligence Command. "The Iranian commander you encountered wasn't a regular naval officer, Captain Rashid Hosseini, Revolutionary Guard Special Operations." With experience in asymmetric maritime warfare and a particular expertise in boarding operations designed to look like piracy. I remembered the Iranian commander's precise English, his calm demeanor, even when faced with American warships. At the time, I'd attributed his composure to professional training, but Rivera's description suggested something more sophisticated. When you offered to assist with repairs to his damaged vessel, you unknowingly provided him with a face-saving exit from an operation that had already failed. The communication equipment had been moved off the tanker during the night, transferred to a submarine that was never detected by Iranian forces. By the time Hosseini's team boarded the humanitarian vessel, they were seizing containers full of actual medical supplies. Rivera pulled out what appeared to be a transcript of radio communications, many of the entries marked with timestamps I recognized from that morning in the Persian Gulf. Your actions prevented what could have escalated into a significant military engagement. Intelligence analysts estimated that if shooting had started between your task force and the Iranian vessels, Tehran would have been forced to respond with additional naval units to protect their personnel. He opened to a page near the back of the transcript file. This is the assessment from the Pentagon's Strategic Planning Division, filed 3 days after the incident. Quote, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's tactical decision-making and diplomatic improvisation prevented potential military escalation that could have required carrier group deployment and resulted in closure of the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping. The weight of what I was hearing settled over me like a lead blanket. The morning I'd thought of as successful crisis management had actually been crisis prevention on a scale I'd never imagined. The routine patrol that had earned me a standard commendation had actually prevented an international incident that could have affected global shipping and potentially triggered broader regional conflict. Why wasn't I told? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Rivera closed the transcript file and pulled out another folder, this one containing what looked like formal military recommendations. Because success sometimes requires secrecy. If Iran had known that we were aware of their operation in advance, they would have realized they had a security leak. The communication equipment seizure was part of a larger intelligence operation tracking Revolutionary Guard activities throughout the region. He handed me a document bearing the letterhead of the Office of the Secretary of the Navy. 3 separate recommendations for the Navy Cross were filed for your actions during Operation Seahawk. All 3 were classified and sealed to protect ongoing intelligence operations. The official record shows you receiving a Navy Achievement Medal for successful completion of patrol duties. I stared at the recommendations, each one signed by officers whose names I recognized as belonging to people who advised admirals and briefed congressional committees. The language was formal, technical, but the meaning was clear. My actions had been deemed worthy of one of the Navy's highest honors, but politics and classified operations had required that recognition to be buried. Admiral Blackwood spent the last 6 months of his life working to declassify these materials, Rivera said. He believed that officers shouldn't be forced to carry the burden of unrecognized service, that families should understand what their loved ones accomplish in the name of national security. Rivera stood and moved to a second safe, this one larger, built into the wall behind his desk. There's more. Video testimonies from your crew members, intelligence analyses of the long-term strategic impact of preventing the equipment seizure, and assessments from Allied maritime commanders who were briefed on the operation after it concluded. He pulled out a small digital device, similar to a tablet but marked with security features I'd never seen. Admiral Blackwood arranged for these testimonies to be recorded and preserved. Your sonar operator, your engineering chief, the translator who handled communications with the Iranian vessels. All of them were debriefed about the operation and asked to provide their perspectives on your leadership during the crisis. The device powered on to reveal a simple menu with 6 video files, each labeled with a name I recognized from the USS Meridian crew. My throat felt dry as I realized I was about to hear my own people describe events I'd lived through, but from perspectives I'd never considered. Rivera handed me a pair of headphones. Admiral Blackwood's instructions were specific. You should watch these alone, then decide what you want to do with the information. The Naval War College has a private viewing room available if you prefer not to watch them here. I looked at the device in my hands, at the classified documents spread across Rivera's desk. at the safe that apparently contained more evidence of achievements my family would never understand because they'd been buried for reasons of national security. The gap between my family's perception of my career and the reality preserved in classified files was so vast it felt surreal. "Commander Rivera," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "What happens if this information becomes public?" He considered the question for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "The operational details would remain classified, but the recognition could be declassified without compromising ongoing security interests. Admiral Blackwood believed you deserved the choice of whether to pursue official recognition or let sleeping documents lie." The device felt heavier than it should have, loaded with testimonies from people who'd served under my command during events that had shaped international relations in ways I was only beginning to understand. Outside Rivera's window, afternoon shadows were beginning to stretch across the Naval War College grounds, and I realized I'd been here for hours without feeling the passage of time. The truth, as Admiral Blackwood had preserved it, was waiting for me to decide what to do with it. The private viewing room at the Naval War College felt like a confessional booth, soundproofed and windowless, with just a desk, chair, and screen large enough to make the recorded testimonies feel like conversations with ghosts. I'd chosen to watch the videos here rather than in Commander Rivera's office, needing space to process whatever my crew members had said about events I was still struggling to understand fully. The first video file was labeled, quote, "Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, Engineering." Thompson had been my engine room chief aboard the USS Meridian, a 20-year Navy veteran, with the kind of practical wisdom that kept ships running when textbook solutions failed. His face filled the screen, older than I remembered, wearing dress blues against a neutral background that suggested an official debriefing environment. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell made a decision that morning that probably prevented a shooting war," Thompson said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who'd thought carefully about his words. "When we detected those Iranian vessels, standard protocol would have been to request instructions from Fleet Command and maintain observation distance. But the skipper recognized that by the time we received orders, whatever was happening to that tanker would already be finished." Thompson leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more intense. "What people don't understand about command decisions at sea is that you're operating with incomplete information under time pressure that doesn't exist in any other environment." The skipper had maybe 10 minutes to assess the situation, evaluate options, and commit to a course of action that could affect international relations. She chose to move closer and investigate, knowing that if she was wrong about the threat, she could face court-martial for exceeding her authority. The video cut to a different angle, suggesting this had been a formal interview rather than casual conversation. When we arrived at the scene and saw armed personnel on the deck of what was supposed to be a humanitarian vessel, everyone on the bridge understood we were looking at something that wasn't in any operations manual. The Iranian commander was professional, but he was also clearly military, not Coast Guard or anti-piracy patrol. His crew moved with the precision of special operations personnel. Thompson paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. The skipper's decision to offer assistance with repairs instead of demanding immediate withdrawal was brilliant tactical thinking disguised as humanitarian concern. She gave the Iranian commander a way to disengage without losing face, while ensuring the safety of the tanker crew and completion of our mission objectives. That kind of diplomatic improvisation under pressure isn't something you can teach in any classroom. The second video featured Lieutenant Sarah Chen, who had served as communications officer during the deployment. Chen appeared younger than Thompson, but her eyes carried the same weight of experience that came from handling classified information in high-stress situations. The morning of the incident, we were monitoring multiple frequency bands because intelligence had indicated increased Iranian naval activity in our patrol sector, Chen said. "When the skipper ordered us to investigate the contact, I was handling encrypted communications with Fleet Command while simultaneously monitoring Iranian military frequencies and coordinating with the other ships in our task force." Chen pulled out a notebook, referencing handwritten notes as she spoke. What became clear during the engagement was that the Iranian vessels were conducting a planned operation, not responding to a distress call or investigating suspicious activity. Their radio traffic was too coordinated, too professional for a routine boarding. When Lieutenant Commander Mitchell began offering assistance, I watched the Iranian communication patterns shift from operational to face-saving. The camera zoomed in as Chen leaned forward. The skipper was conducting 3 separate conversations simultaneously. She was talking to the Iranian commander about technical assistance, coordinating with our engineering teams about what help we could realistically provide, and maintaining communication with Fleet Command about the evolving situation. But she was also listening to my translations of Iranian radio traffic, using their own communications to understand their true situation and find a solution that worked for everyone. Chen closed her notebook and looked directly into the camera. Command presence under pressure isn't about giving orders. It's about processing multiple information streams, understanding the political implications of your tactical decisions, and finding solutions that accomplish your mission while preventing unnecessary escalation. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell demonstrated all of those capabilities during an incident that could have easily spiraled into international crisis. The third video was the most difficult to watch. Petty Officer James Rodriguez had been the sonar operator who first detected the Iranian vessels, and his testimony included details I'd never heard about the technical complexity of the situation we'd encountered. The Iranian vessels were running silent when we first detected them, using passive sonar and minimal engine noise to avoid detection, Rodriguez said. This wasn't standard anti-piracy patrol behavior. Pirates don't have the training or equipment to coordinate 3-ship operations with military-grade stealth protocols. Rodriguez had charts and technical diagrams with him, pointing to specific data as he explained what his equipment had revealed that morning. When we moved to investigate, I was tracking not just the 3 Iranian surface vessels, but also underwater movement patterns that suggested submarine activity in the area. The skipper was making tactical decisions based on a 3-dimensional threat environment that extended both above and below the waterline. He set down his charts and looked directly at the camera. What Lieutenant Commander Mitchell accomplished that morning was essentially maritime diplomacy, backed by superior positioning and tactical awareness. She used our technical capabilities to understand the full scope of the situation, then applied that understanding to find a solution that satisfied everyone's operational requirements while preventing military confrontation. Rodriguez paused, his expression growing more serious. The Iranian commander accepted our assistance because his own sonar operator had probably detected the same underwater activity I had. He knew there were additional Allied assets in the area, and that any escalation would bring overwhelming response. The skipper's offer of technical assistance gave him a professional reason to complete his mission and withdraw without having to acknowledge the presence of forces he couldn't engage successfully. The fourth video featured Chief Hospital Corpsman Lisa Park, who had been part of the medical team that assisted with repairs aboard the Iranian sea vessel. Her testimony revealed details about the human side of the operation that I'd never fully considered. When we boarded the Iranian vessel to assist with damage control, we were essentially conducting joint operations with personnel from a nation we were technically in conflict with, Park said. The professionalism required to coordinate emergency repairs while maintaining security protocols and diplomatic neutrality was extraordinary. Park had photographs with her, images I'd never seen of American and Iranian sailors working side by side to repair damaged equipment. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell established safety protocols that protected both crews while allowing effective cooperation. She understood that successful completion of the repairs would allow the Iranian commander to withdraw with dignity, while ensuring the safety of the humanitarian tanker crew. The camera angle shifted to show Park more clearly as she continued. What people don't realize is that those 6 hours of joint repair work probably did more to prevent future incidents than any formal diplomatic agreement could have accomplished. Iranian naval personnel saw American crews providing professional assistance without attempting to exploit their tactical advantage. That kind of experience creates relationships that can prevent misunderstandings in future encounters. Park set down her photographs and looked directly into the camera. Command leadership in crisis situations isn't about making dramatic gestures or demonstrating superior firepower. It's about finding solutions that accomplish your mission while creating conditions for long-term stability. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell demonstrated that kind of strategic thinking under circumstances that could have easily resulted in casualties and international incident. The fifth video was from Commander David Walsh, the task force commander who had coordinated overall operations during the incident. His testimony provided context I'd never possessed about the broader strategic implications of the morning's events. Operation Seahawk was designed as a surgical intelligence operation with minimal risk of detection or escalation, Walsh said. When Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's vessel became the primary response asset, we had to adapt our entire operational approach to accommodate circumstances no one had anticipated. Walsh had operational charts spread across a table, showing the positions of various naval assets during the incident. The decision tree Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was operating under included variables that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Iranian response to any military action would have required carrier group deployment, potentially closing the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping and affecting global energy markets. He pointed to specific locations on his charts as he continued. The solution she developed, offering technical assistance while maintaining tactical superiority, allowed completion of our primary mission while avoiding escalation that could have required massive military response. From a strategic planning perspective, her actions prevented a crisis that could have cost billions in economic disruption and potentially triggered broader regional conflict. Walsh looked up from his charts. Command decisions at the tactical level often have strategic consequences that the decision-maker can't fully appreciate in the moment. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's ability to find diplomatic solutions under extreme pressure demonstrated the kind of leadership that prevents wars rather than winning them. The final video was from Admiral Patricia Hayes, Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, whose testimony was marked with classification levels that suggested I was receiving information normally restricted to senior flag officers. Operation Seahawk represented a convergence of intelligence, tactical response, and diplomatic crisis management that required coordination across multiple agencies and allied nations, Admiral Hayes said. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's actions during the crisis became a case study for how junior officers can affect strategic outcomes through superior decision-making under pressure. Admiral Hayes had documents with her that bore classification stamps I'd never seen, suggesting access to information at the highest levels of naval command. The communication equipment that Iranian forces were attempting to seize represented technology that could have shifted the balance of maritime power throughout the Persian Gulf region. Preventing that seizure required tactical excellence combined with diplomatic sophistication that exceeded normal expectations for officers at Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's level. She set down her documents and looked directly into the camera. The 3 recommendations for the Navy Cross filed for Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's actions were supported by intelligence assessments, Allied maritime commanders, and strategic planning analysts who understood the full scope of what she had accomplished. The decision to classify those recommendations was made at the highest levels of government to protect ongoing intelligence operations. Admiral Hayes paused, her expression growing more serious. However, the value of Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's service extends beyond any single operation. Her demonstrated ability to combine tactical excellence with strategic thinking and diplomatic skill represents the kind of leadership the Navy needs for future challenges. The classification of her achievements serves national security interests, but it also deprives the service of recognizing and promoting the kind of excellence that prevents conflicts rather than winning them. The final video ended with Admiral Hayes looking directly into the camera. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell deserves recognition not just for her technical competence, but for her ability to find solutions that serve both immediate tactical requirements and long-term strategic interests. That combination of skills represents the highest traditions of naval service. The viewing room fell silent as the screen went dark, leaving me alone with testimonies that painted a picture of leadership and achievement I'd never fully understood. The morning in the Persian Gulf that I'd remembered as successful crisis management had actually been crisis prevention on a scale that affected international relations and global economic stability. I sat in the darkened room, processing the disconnect between these testimonies and my family's perception of my career as a series of routine assignments that had failed to produce traditional markers of success. The crew members who had served under my command understood the complexity and importance of what we'd accomplished together, while my own family measured my achievements against Kevin's partnership at a Cleveland law firm. Commander Rivera knocked on the viewing room door, entering when I called for him to come in. He carried another folder, this one thinner than the previous documents, marked with more recent dates. "There's one more element to Admiral Blackwood's preservation of these records," Rivera said, setting the folder on the desk beside the viewing equipment. 3 weeks ago, the Pentagon declassified portions of Operation Seahawk documentation. The tactical details remain classified, but your role in preventing maritime crisis can now be officially recognized. He opened the folder to reveal what appeared to be formal naval correspondence, bearing letterheads from the Office of the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations. Admiral Blackwood spent months working through proper channels to enable this recognition. The Navy Cross recommendations can now be processed through normal channels, and your official service record can be amended to reflect the strategic importance of your actions. I picked up the first document, a formal commendation signed by officials whose names I recognized from congressional testimony and policy briefings. The language was technical, military, but the meaning was clear. My actions during Operation Seahawk were being officially recognized as having prevented international crisis and demonstrated leadership excellence under extreme pressure. "There's also this," Rivera said, handing me a smaller envelope marked with my name and rank. "Admiral Blackwood left instructions that this should be given to you after you'd reviewed all the classified materials and made your decision about pursuing official recognition." The envelope contained a brief note in Admiral Blackwood's handwriting, along with what appeared to be a formal invitation printed on heavy paper stock. The note was simple. "Sarah, your family measures success in terms they understand. The Navy measures it in terms that matter. Choose the standard that serves the greater good." The invitation was for a recognition ceremony at the Naval War College, scheduled for the following Saturday, honoring, quote, "distinguished maritime leadership in crisis prevention and international diplomacy." My name appeared on the invitation alongside 3 other officers, all recipients of major commendations for classified operations that were being publicly acknowledged for the first time. Rivera explained the logistics as I read through the ceremony details. Admiral Blackwood arranged for this recognition to be conducted in a manner that allows your family to attend and understand the significance of your service. The ceremony will include briefings on the strategic importance of maritime crisis prevention, allowing civilian guests to appreciate the complexity and importance of the operations being honored. I looked at the invitation again, noting that it included instructions for family members who wished to attend, along with contact information for coordinating travel and accommodations. Admiral Blackwood had thought of everything, creating an opportunity for official recognition while ensuring my family could witness and understand achievements they'd never known existed. "The choice is yours," Rivera said. "You can accept the recognition publicly, with your family present to witness the ceremony, or you can decline and let the classified record speak for itself." Admiral Blackwood believed you deserved the option of having your service properly acknowledged. I thought about Kevin's promotion celebration, about Dad's speech praising achievements that fit comfortably into dinner party conversation, about the disconnect between my family's understanding of success and the reality of preventing international crises in classified operations. The invitation in my hands represented an opportunity to bridge that gap, to help my family understand that there were different measures of accomplishment beyond partnership tracks and social recognition. That evening, I called my parents from my hotel room in Newport. Mom answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the slightly worried tone she used whenever I called unexpectedly. "Sarah, honey, is everything all right? You sounded tired when you left the party." I took a deep breath, looking at the invitation spread on the hotel desk beside Admiral Blackwood's letter and the classified access card that had started this journey. "Mom, I need to ask you and Dad something. Next Saturday, the Naval War College is holding a recognition ceremony. I've been selected for a commendation, and I'd like you both to attend." There was a pause, then the sound of Mom covering the phone to talk to Dad. When she came back, her voice sounded confused. "Of course we'll come, but what kind of ceremony? You didn't mention anything about awards when you were here." "It's complicated," I said. "The Navy is recognizing officers for operations that were previously classified. I can't explain the details over the phone, but it's significant enough that they're flying in family members from around the country." Dad took the phone. Sarah, what's this about? Is this one of those participation trophy things the military does for routine deployments? I closed my eyes, remembering Admiral Hayes's testimony about preventing wars rather than winning them, about the strategic implications of tactical decisions made under pressure. Dad, it's not routine. The ceremony is specifically for officers whose actions prevented international crises. The Navy is declassifying some operations to provide proper recognition for achievements that couldn't be acknowledged when they occurred. There was another pause. Then Dad's voice, sounding less skeptical. International crises? What kind of operations? The kind that prevent wars from starting, I said. The kind that keep shipping lanes open and prevent regional conflicts that could affect global energy markets. The kind that require tactical excellence and diplomatic skill combined. Mom took the phone back. "We'll be there," she said, her voice carrying a tone I hadn't heard before. "Just tell us when and where." After providing the ceremony details and hanging up, I called Kevin's office. His assistant connected me immediately, and Kevin's voice carried the slightly harried tone of someone managing multiple urgent matters simultaneously. "Sarah, hey, thanks again for coming to the celebration. I know family stuff isn't really your thing." "Actually, Kevin, I'm calling about family stuff," I said. "The Navy is holding a recognition ceremony next Saturday, and I'd like you to attend. It's at the Naval War College in Newport." Kevin's tone shifted to the careful politeness he used when he wasn't sure how to respond. "Sure, I can probably make it work. What kind of recognition?" "The kind that involves classified operations and international crisis prevention," I said. "The kind that might help you understand what I've been doing for the past few years while you've been building your legal career." There was a long pause. "Sarah? Is this serious? Like, actually significant?" "Kevin," I said, looking at the testimonies from my crew members and the formal commendations bearing signatures of senior naval officials, "this is the kind of recognition that people spend entire careers hoping to receive. The kind that gets mentioned in military history textbooks." "I'll be there," Kevin said, his voice carrying a different tone than I'd heard in years. "And Sarah? I'm sorry if we've never properly acknowledged what you do. Sometimes civilians don't understand military service, especially when it involves things you can't talk about." The ceremony took place in the Naval War College's historic Memorial Hall, a grand space with vaulted ceilings and portraits of distinguished naval officers spanning 3 centuries of American maritime service. The setting was impressive enough to convey the significance of the recognition being bestowed, formal enough to ensure civilian guests understood the gravity of the occasion. My family arrived early, dressed in the kind of formal attire they usually reserved for weddings and funerals. Dad wore his best suit, the same one from Kevin's celebration. But his expression was different, more attentive, as if he was trying to understand an environment that operated by rules he didn't know. Mom had bought a new dress, navy blue with understated elegance, that suggested she'd researched appropriate attire for military ceremonies. Kevin brought Jessica, and they both looked around Memorial Hall with the kind of careful observation that people used when they wanted to understand something completely outside their experience. The walls were lined with displays explaining the strategic importance of maritime operations, the complexity of international crisis prevention, and the challenges of conducting diplomacy under extreme pressure. Commander Rivera provided a briefing for family members before the ceremony began, explaining the classified nature of the operations being recognized and the strategic importance of the actions being honored. He used charts and historical examples to help civilian guests understand how individual tactical decisions could affect international relations and global economic stability. The officers being recognized today demonstrated the kind of leadership that prevents conflicts rather than winning them, Rivera explained to the assembled families. Their actions required technical expertise, tactical excellence, and diplomatic sophistication combined under extreme pressure and time constraints that don't exist in civilian environments. The ceremony itself was conducted with the formal precision that characterized important military recognition events. Admiral Hayes delivered the keynote address, explaining how modern naval operations required officers capable of combining traditional maritime skills with crisis prevention capabilities and international diplomatic understanding. When my name was called, I walked to the podium with the same measured pace I'd learned at the academy, aware that my family was watching from the front row with expressions I'd never seen before. Admiral Hayes read the citation for the Navy Cross, describing actions that prevented international crisis, demonstrated exceptional leadership under pressure, and reflected the highest traditions of naval service. The medal itself was beautiful, heavy with significance and history, but the moment that mattered most was looking out at my family and seeing recognition in their eyes for the first time. Not understanding exactly because the complexity of maritime crisis prevention couldn't be fully grasped in a single ceremony, but recognition that there were measures of achievement beyond their previous experience. After the ceremony, during the reception in the War College's Officers Club, Dad approached me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not pride, exactly, but something approaching respect. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying to express something they'd never had to articulate before. "I owe you an apology. We've been measuring your success by standards that don't apply to what you actually do." Mom joined us, her eyes slightly wet in the way that suggested she'd been crying discreetly during the ceremony. "We didn't understand," she said simply. "We couldn't understand because you never told us. But now I realize you probably couldn't tell us." Kevin approached with Jessica, both carrying drinks and wearing expressions that suggested they'd spent the reception trying to process information completely outside their previous experience. "Sarah," Kevin said, "I've been thinking about what Dad said at my celebration, about smart choices and good things happening. I think maybe we've been defining smart choices too narrowly." The conversation continued for another hour, my family asking questions about military service, international operations, and the challenges of conducting diplomacy under pressure. They were trying to understand a world they'd never considered, making an effort to appreciate achievements they'd never known existed. 6 months later, I received orders to the Pentagon, assignment to the Strategic Planning Division, with responsibilities for maritime crisis prevention and international cooperation. The assignment came with promotion to commander and opportunities to shape policy at levels where tactical experience combined with strategic thinking could affect global stability. My family attended the promotion ceremony at the Pentagon, and Dad's speech at the celebration dinner afterward focused on service, sacrifice, and the importance of achievements that couldn't be measured in traditional terms. Kevin had researched military career progression and spoke knowledgeably about the significance of Pentagon assignments and the responsibilities of strategic planning positions. But the moment that meant the most was a quiet conversation with Mom after the ceremony, when she pulled me aside and said, "I'm proud of you, Sarah. Not just for the promotion or the recognition, but for doing work that matters in ways I'm still learning to understand." The truth, as Admiral Blackwood had preserved it, had bridged the gap between my family's understanding of success and the reality of serving something larger than personal achievement. The recognition hadn't changed what I'd accomplished, but it had changed how my family understood the value of service that extended beyond dinner party conversation. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating an enemy or winning a battle. Sometimes it's helping the people you love. Understand that there are different ways to measure a life well lived, different standards of success that serve the greater good. Admiral Blackwood had given me the tools to claim that victory, and my family had found the grace to recognize achievements they'd never known how to see. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.